Your Excellency, Lynn MacDonald, High Commissioner of Canada to Singapore, Your Excellency, Marguerite Vono, Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Singapore and Brunei, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, and on behalf of the board and team at United Women Singapore, welcome to United Women Singapore's inaugural Distinguished Speaker Series. As many of you know, United Women Singapore is a local non-profit organization focused on advancing women's empowerment, gender equality, and building a pipeline of future women leaders and influencers in Singapore. The Distinguished Speaker Series features global business leaders and knowledge leaders and influencers sharing their insights and thoughts on a wide variety of topics, including leadership, diversity and inclusion, resilience, wellness, self-care, branding, reputation, and all with a focus on women's empowerment and gender equality. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Arianna Huffington, co-founder of the Huffington Post and founder and CEO of Thrive Global. Ms. Huffington will speak to you about the importance of building resilience, leadership in this new normal, and share her own personal experiences that have shaped her global success. We also have with us today, after Ms. Huffington's spoken, Joey Hubbard, Chief Training Officer of Thrive Global, who will hold a short training session on resilience and also share with us the tools to help us better manage stress and move from awareness to action to science-backed microsteps. Let me at this point thank our long-time partners for supporting this event. Goldman Sachs, a leading global investment banking, securities, and investment management firm. MasterCard, a global technology company in the payments industry with a mission to connect and power an inclusive digital economy. And last but not least, Bloomberg, the global leader in business and financial data, news, and insight. Speaking of Bloomberg, today's event will have Haslinda Amin in conversation with Arianna Huffington. In addition to being Chief International Correspondent for Southeast Asia and anchor to Bloomberg's television, Haslinda Amin is also an active member on the UWS board. One that I'm very proud to say she is a great contributor to, and for which we have really thrilled to have her on. So without further ado, allow me to introduce and invite my fellow board member, Haslinda Amin, to take it over. Haslinda?
Georgette, thank you so much for that. And good morning to everyone who's joined us today. Now, thriving at work before the pandemic was already challenging enough. Now, with the pandemic persisting, burnout and fatigue are more real than ever before. Arianna Huffington knows burnout. She knows fatigue. Back in 2007, Arianna collapsed from exhaustion and sleep deprivation, and in the process broke her cheekbone. But she's recovered from all of that and is back thriving after that wake-up call. I mean, Arianna needs no introduction. We heard from Georgette, the founder of the Huffington Post, also founder and CEO of Thrive Global, which is a behavior change technology company. She's authored 15 books, including Thrive Global, The Sleep Revolution, on becoming fearless. She's been named among the world's 100 most influential people. And today, Ariana has taken the time to join us from Los Angeles. Ariana, hello, a big, big hello from the Lion City. We're so excited to have you.
Delighted to be with so many women and men in the audience, and I hope you're all safe and well.
Well, safe and well, yes, and we're super excited. We appreciate you being here. You have a lot of fans. We've had a lot of feedback in the lead up to this event. I want to start our conversation focusing on resilience. 10 months on, are we better at coping with the stresses than 10 months ago? There's been so much stress, emotional stress has been accumulated. Are we in a better place?
You know, there are many, many individual reactions. Unfortunately, there isn't one cookie cutter reaction. This has been a time of incredible trials, losses, losses of loved ones, financial losses, but also it has been a catalyst for many people to look at our lives and see what was not working even before the pandemic and what we wanted to bring more of into our lives. And resilience is one of those essential characteristics. And at Thrive, with all the companies we are working with, we are finding that if they don't prioritize the resilience of their employees or their organizations, it is much harder to navigate these times of deep uncertainty and anxiety. So resilience has gone from being a nice to have to being absolutely essential, both for people's lives and for business metrics.
We've seen how COVID-19 has gone from being a health crisis to an economic crisis to a geopolitical crisis. So much blame game going on. It's also now a labor crisis, Ariana. Millions have lost their jobs. We often talk about how a crisis provides an opportunity. What opportunities are there for us to get right, to set the right path for the future?
Well, it's particularly a labor crisis for women. As you know, 4 times as many women, certainly in the United States, have dropped out of the labor force in the last month because of the incredible burden on women of managing often full-time jobs and children being educated at home. And so the opportunity here, the catalyst, is to look at the fact that women were always carrying the mental load. Even when partners help, the mental load, the primary responsibility is still with women. So one of the things that we are offering at Thrive is a program called Working Families, where we encourage women and men to look at their home and the chores in the home and literally divide them based on an ownership model. The way you do at work when you delegate something and you don't hold onto it at the same time. So it's not about can you help with lunch? It's about can you own lunch? From conception to execution to conclusion. And we find that this really changes the amount of also petty resentments and grievances that often accumulate at home when both partners are stretched, trying to manage full-time jobs, children if they have children at home, and all the household chores.
Have you seen a lot of buy-in into the idea of perhaps dividing the chores at home and so on and so forth? Because traditionally, women have always taken it upon themselves to do it and to do it their way. Anything that is not done the way they envision it is not acceptable. They need to learn to let go.
Oh, that's a great point. Yes, we've seen a great response. In fact, we've even gamified it and provided like digital cards. So let's say I'm taking birthday parties. You are taking planning the morning lessons. And of course, every week, we recommend that you have like a meeting, the way you would have a meeting in the office, a one-on-one, and you can divide tasks again. It sounds incredibly organized, but the alternative is to just wing it. And when we wing it, the greatest responsibility falls on women.
Are you surprised that in such times when we keep talking about mental health, making time for ourselves, we're actually stretching ourselves even more? Most of us are working even longer hours, despite the fact that we are going to the gym, we are doing yoga, we are taking care of mental health. Is that the way forward? What is the way forward?
So, leaving aside the little practical steps that we mentioned, Haslinda, I think the way forward is to look at what was not working before the pandemic. We were already dealing with a mental health crisis, already dealing with skyrocketing increases in chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension, which are behavior based. And in fact, I left the Huffington Post to found Thrive Global in order to address the stress and burnout epidemic that was destroying our health and actually our productivity as well. And we find the way to do that is through micro steps. And Joey Hubbard, who is following me, is going to talk more about that. Small, daily, incremental steps that we can introduce into our lives in every area and make it easier to adopt healthier habits. So our app is divided into 4 journeys, broken down into micro steps. We call our micro steps too small to fail. And it's, if you think of it, the opposite of New Year resolutions, which are big and dramatic, and most of the time people abandon them after 2.5 weeks. So the micro steps fall into these 4 journeys, as I mentioned: recharge, which is about sleep, and 60-second resets during the day to course correct from stress. Fuel, which is about what we eat and how much are we moving. Focus, which is so important because I'm sure you're finding that more and more of us are becoming completely addicted to our phones and to social media. So learning how to set boundaries. In my case, for example, I have ended all notifications from all news organizations because, you know, when I want to get the news, I go get the news. I don't want to be interrupted. And then learning when to stop consuming coronavirus news so we can properly unwind and be able to sleep. And finally, connect, you know, learning some more tools and techniques to connect with others during a time of incredible physical disconnection.
Ariana, that's on the personal level. What about leaders? Companies are only as resilient as their employees. How do they shape the company culture, their policies? How do they create a work environment where people can thrive?
That is a great question. And you're absolutely right that leaders have, in fact, as we are finding in all our experiences with multinational companies and smaller companies, have been feeling a tremendous burden of responsibility. And at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of them felt as though they couldn't afford to take any time for themselves. So I remember, for example, being at a global management committee meeting for Accenture, you know, the top 35 people running Accenture around the world. And the head of HR, Ellen Shook, said, you know, I haven't walked for days. You know, she used to take a daily walk because she said, I don't have the luxury to step away. And we had to reframe it and see these investments in ourselves as leaders, not as a luxury, but truly an investment in leadership. Because leaders are recognizing they need a new leadership playbook because if they are depleted, they are actually much less likely to be creative, innovative, and empathetic, which are key qualities when it comes to leading in times of crisis and leading in times when you're not just doing maintenance.
Before I follow up on the issue of leadership, I just want to know this. The pandemic has given prominence to wellness. It's become a $4 trillion industry. But the question really is whether there's real traction in accepting and understanding the importance of mental health. In Asia in particular, mental issues have been quite a taboo for a very long time, though now governments seem to be taking the lead, wanting to, I guess, reverse that thinking to say it is okay not to be okay.
Absolutely. And you know, Haslinda, the reason why this is being adopted, even in countries, as you say, where discussing mental health has been more of a taboo, the reason for that is because companies, management are seeing the connection between lack of mental resilience, anxiety and depression, and business metrics. And we are seeing that not just in HR departments, but the CFO department, the CEO, boards. In fact, we have created a mental resilience dashboard because if you think of it, companies have dashboards for everything, you know, P&L, customer success, cybersecurity, succession, but they don't really know what is happening with their people. And for us, being able to put together all the metrics, individual and company, in an anonymized and aggregated way, of course, to produce a score about the mental resilience of the employees and a score about risk of burnout is absolutely key in managing the business. And these are all very new in terms of adoption. And as in everything, some companies are ahead of the curve, they are trailblazing, and others are lagging. But this is an inevitably crucial trend.
You talked about leadership. The pandemic has forced a rethink of leadership. What does it take to lead companies in such a disruptive environment where change is pervasive and continuous? What kind of leadership is needed, and what kind of leadership is most effective?
Well, I would say the first quality of leadership that is absolutely essential during these times of transition, disruption, and deep uncertainty, the most important quality is to be able to be unflappable. And that's why my favorite role model is Marcus Aurelius, who was the emperor of Rome for 19 years, 14 of which he had to deal with a terrible pandemic. He dealt with invasions, betrayals, everything. And he wrote a book called Meditations about unflappable leadership. And that really means being able to be in the eye of the hurricane. So right now, you know, we are in the middle of a metaphorical hurricane. The question is, how can we find a place of peace, strength, and wisdom in us, and tap into that during times of such deep uncertainty and disruption like we're going through right now.
What are leaders getting wrong?
Well, I think there are still leaders who think that the way to be the best is to be working 24/7. There are still leaders who think that burnout is just the price you have to pay for success. And this is really what is changing, though, because we have more and more role models who, by modeling that at the top of companies, are giving cultural permission to others. For example, when we launch a mental health or mental resilience program, as we did with one of your sponsors, MasterCard, we had their head of people, and we had their CEO participating, writing about what they were doing to improve their own physical and mental health. And that makes a big difference. And it's a very different way to launch support benefits for employees, very different than the more traditional way where you post it and whoever wants it takes it. We believe in having almost like an internal marketing campaign where we encourage people to participate, and nothing encourages people more than storytelling from the top. And Halinda, this is not just about knowledge workers, people who have the luxury, as we have, to be working from home. It also involves frontline workers who are particularly vulnerable as they have to work in stores or delivering products or call centers. We are working, for example, with Walmart, and there are over 2 million employees or associates, as they call them, working from stores. And it's imperative to be able to help them as they're making decisions every day about sleep, about food, about movement, about gratitude. And again, everything broken down into micro steps.
Would you say as well that the pandemic has somewhat changed the mentality and expectations of the workers themselves? I mean, before deciding which company to work for, they would take into consideration all these factors. Does it change the psyche of workers?
Well, it has, but as you know, in many countries, unemployment is rising. And not everybody has the luxury of being able to work somewhere where they love. But once we can get the economy back to pre-pandemic levels, I think that will be a huge consideration in recruitment and retention. And a lot of companies are already looking ahead at that. How are you finding it? Because you are covering all these areas.
I mean, like you said, millions and millions have lost their jobs. I think it's quite difficult to be choosy in getting employment. So I think right now the consideration is just survival. But I think, like you said, eventually it will become a priority, especially for the younger generation. I want to touch on some of the attributes that leaders are showing among women in particular: empathy, compassion. They have come to the fore. These are the qualities that have been associated with women, but of course not exclusive to women. Are you encouraged perhaps that this could somehow help pave the way for more women to assume leadership positions?
Yes, absolutely. But also I see more men recognizing the importance of what have traditionally been seen as more feminine qualities, like empathy, like collaboration, like team building. These are essential for men and women. So, as well as a greater emphasis on equity and gender and other diversity, we are seeing a lot of men who are much more willing to show vulnerability, to be empathetic, and to adopt a lot of these qualities which were not seen as qualities of tough male leaders.
What's your own leadership style? Has it evolved? How is it now compared to 10 or 20 years ago?
Well, the biggest priority and evolution in my own leadership style is around what we call at Thrive, our number one cultural value, which is compassionate directness. I believe that in any relationship, whether personal or professional, there are always going to be disagreements, there are always going to be different points of view. And the most important thing is to express them. When they're expressed, we can deal with anything. If they're not expressed, it's really problematic and resentments mount and grievances grow. So that's our number one value. We um, always try to do a cultural evaluation before we hire somebody to make sure they are able to be direct, because a lot of people have a very hard time being direct. And and for me, that is absolutely key. And the other is to make sure people on our teams act like owners. You know how owners don't just do what's in front of them, they care about everything that they see, and are willing to speak up about it.
So a sense of ownership is important because that's where you keep pushing it higher and higher in terms of standards and quality. I want to take a look at your personal journey, Ariana. I've been stalking you online, and I'm sure I'm not the only one out there. You have a laminated card in your wallet with a Rooney quote: "Live life as if everything is rigged in your favor." Why is this quote so meaningful to you, and how have you lived by it?
It's so meaningful to me because, you know, life is never linear. I'm sure your life, my life, anybody's life has ups and downs. And so the question is, how do we deal with the downs? And right now, most people are going through a definite down in many ways. So if we can see, as Rumi suggests, that there is a purpose to everything that happens in life, that it's not arbitrary, and then it's so much easier to accept it, cooperate with it, and be able to look back later in life and see why it happens. So that's why live life as though everything is written in your favor is so important to me. And I have definitely instilled it in my two daughters. In fact, my youngest daughter has her first book being published today, which is about that. You know, she was hit by a bike 3 years ago in the streets of New York and has been suffering with debilitating headaches. So she took something which was really a cause of tremendous pain and disruption in her life, and used it as the beginning of a spiritual journey and going deeper in herself and her life, and wrote a book which is now published as an Audible original called Map to the Unknown. And as she says, she doesn't end it, like life doesn't end with living happily ever after, everything wrapped up in a beautiful bow, but it's clearly a recognition that her life, my life, I'm sure your life, is a journey where there are challenges that the more we can accept and embrace and learn from, the more we will grow and be able to transcend them.
And in your own journey, Ariana, what was one of the lowest points, and how did you navigate through that?
Well, you know, going back to the beginnings of my career, um, in my 20s, you know, when I wrote my first book, I then which was very successful. I then wanted to write a book on the crisis in political leadership, which nobody wanted to publish. So I found myself having a book rejected by 37 publishers. And that's where resilience and perseverance are so important. And I ended up, you know, getting a loan from a nice banker that kept me um, going for another few rejections until finally the book was published. And it was really a lesson from my mother about failure. You know, her motto was, failure is not the opposite of success, it's a stepping stone to success.
It's been amazing. You turned 70 in July. Happy belated birthday.
Thank
And
you.
it's quite a couple of months late. In your reflections, you said so beautifully, what sums it up is moving from struggle to grace. Finally recognizing that life is a dance, between making it happen and letting it happen, and never forgetting that no matter how caught up we are in the world, life is shaped from the inside out. Why is it so difficult to get from struggle to grace, and how do you best navigate it?
Well, first of all, it's a wonderful objective to have because when we move from struggle to grace, there is that sense of a flow in life and of joy. You know, I find that that's one of the biggest changes for me as I grew older, which is that I don't want just to be productive and effective. I also want to find joy in everything I'm doing and have a sense of gratitude about it. And you know, gratitude and grace come from the same root. And I find that especially in times of stress and anxiety, like right now, um, there is no greater antidote than gratitude. So, one of the micro steps we recommend is anytime you're doing something that doesn't require your brain, like washing your hands or washing the dishes, um, remember three things you are grateful for. It's just a tiny little micro step, but it literally begins to change the neural pathways in our brain and reduce the stress that comes from all the anxiety we're living through.
How do you view life? I mean, you founded Huffington Post at 55, Thrive at 66. I'm just wondering, what's the plan for 77?
Well, I really believe that the work we're doing at Thrive is so essential. Being able to end the stress and burnout epidemic, to help people live their lives with less struggle and more grace, and also see that also makes us more productive and address the mental health crisis. These are huge objectives, and I feel that's the area I want to stay involved in and hope that we can have a bigger and bigger impact, especially at a time when people need it so much.
There's no denying you're driven. What drives you? What do you think is behind your successes?
Well, the biggest motivator for me is having an impact on people's lives, whether I was doing it through informing them at the Huffington Post or all the books I wrote on different topics, or now more directly through Thrive Global. That's definitely the biggest impact and the biggest motivator.
Ariana, before I take questions from the attendees, just one last one from me. What's the best advice you've received? That's part A. Part B is, what's the best advice you'd like to give?
Well, the best advice I'd like to give is what I wish I knew when I was younger, because then I wouldn't have collapsed from burnout. And this is to stop believing the delusion that burnout is just the price we pay for success. Giving up that delusion, reframing that in our minds based on all the latest science and all the latest data is absolutely key. And the best advice I received was again from my mother. She used to say, "Don't miss the moment." And I love that because so often we are so looking ahead that we do miss the moment. And in the end, that's all we have. So remembering not to miss the moment.
Live the moment, live the now. Ariana, quite a number of questions here. The first one I'd like to take is from Peter Yang. He says, during this period, what do you think men can do to support? It comes with a smile, by the way, a smiley.
I think this is a great moment for men to be real allies and partners, and at home, taking responsibility for what has to be done, and and at work, making sure that they always empower women around them. In the same way that I always want to encourage women to deal with our own obnoxious roommate living in our head, as I call it, our own negative self-talk and self-doubts, but supporting that whenever we see women at the beginning of their careers, um, helping them find their own strength and voice, it's an amazing gift men can give.
And a question from Ravi Pucha. What do leaders need to continue doing in the pandemic and not necessarily stop?
Well, leaders, both in the pandemic and beyond the pandemic, need to be able to give cultural permission for the mental health conversation, but also helping their people move from a greater awareness to action. It's not enough to know what we should be doing. We also need support in order to do it.
Daniel Subramanian would like to know, who are the leaders you admire today, whether it's in business or politics, any kind really?
So there are so many amazing leaders we have worked with that I admire. I really admire, for example, Julie Sweet, the CEO of Accenture, who has made mental health, a pivotal issue at Accenture, and launched our Thriving Mind mental resilience experience to all 500,000 Accenture employees with a video from her saying, I'm doing this with my team. I invite you to do it as well. It's so important to take that role and that leadership position.
Ariana, do you think women who get to positions of power do little to help other women?
Well, the famous Madeleine Albright saying that there's a place in hell reserved for women who don't help other women. Well, I also think there's a place in heaven reserved for women and men who help other women. And I think more and more women are recognizing how critical that is.
Another question here. Women tend to undersell themselves, men oversell. What's your advice to better position women amongst a typical all-male assessment panel?
Well, that's really part of what I said earlier about this negative self-talk, this voice of self-doubt in more women's than men's heads. So I think being able to let go of that means that we'll be able to stand up more confidently for ourselves and for what we want to achieve, for our talents.
Just one final question before we wrap it up. We're running out of time here. The question is, because we touched on the Rumi Code, how did you get inspired by Rumi?
Oh, I love reading poetry. At night, I love charging my phone outside my bedroom. It's one of my micro steps. And instead reading real physical books that have nothing to do with work. Poetry like Rumi or novels or history. And I find it's a great way to put my life and my problems in perspective and to be able to take that time to truly recharge and start the day energized and completely renewed. And I highly recommend it.
Great words, great reminder. And with that, Ariana, I would like to thank you for your candid sharing today and for being such an inspiration to men and women alike around the world. We're very privileged to have you kick off the United Women Singapore's Distinguished Leadership Series. So from the Lion City, a big thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Take care, Ariana.
Thank you.
Now, time to put that resilience into practice. I'd like to introduce to you Joey Hubbard. Joey is the Chief Training Officer of Thrive Global. In this session, you'll acquire tools to help you manage stress and strengthen your mental resilience, moving from awareness to action. Joey, hello.
Hi, Haslinda. How are you?
Good, thank you. Looking forward to be inspired.
All right, good. Well, let me share my screen with you. We have quite a bit that we're going to talk about today that's really focused on this idea that we need to make sure we're taking care of our brain as well as we take care of our body. There's some fascinating research here that came out of years of research at Stanford. Stanford Medicine spent time really understanding the brain, and they use what's called a functional MRI, which is like an HD MRI. And they scan brains, and they were looking for causation for stress, anxiety, even depression. And what they started to discover in all of their hours of mapping brains is there were actually 8 patterns that they saw, and every brain had one of the 8 patterns. And those patterns they labeled biotypes. And a biotype is the way that our brain responds to stress. And again, everybody they found had one of the 8. Now, what's the value proposition of that? Well, 2 things. One, in understanding what those biotypes are, we also now get to understand how our brain responds to stress. It's a very powerful bit of information because, as I said, everyone has their own way of doing that. But secondly, and the most important part of it was, if that's the case, if we know how our brain responds to stress, then can we learn how to interrupt or mitigate against the causation of stress? And the answer to that is yes. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. What are the things that you can do to make your brain more resilient, right? More elastic, more agile. And so the way Stanford looks at it is, if you think about at night when you go to bed, you plug in your phone, and in the morning you wake up and it's fully charged. Now, depending upon what we do with our phone that day, we may be on several calls, we may, look at videos. The more we use it, the more our battery discharges. And in fact, if it starts to get low, we're aware that we need to plug that back in, right? So that our phone makes it through to the end of the day. Our brain, it actually works the exact same way. What we now know is that if you charge your brain, I'm going to talk to you about some of the ways you do that. If you charge your brain in the right way, then your brain actually becomes more resilient. And if you recharge it, microcharge it throughout the day, the battery stays charged. When it's charged, again, your brain is more able to manage stress effectively. When it discharges, that's when we start to have the experience of overwhelm, anxiety, and stress. So let's dig in. Dr. Leanne Williams, she's the person that led this research. She is amazing, and I think she'll win a Nobel for this, because in her research and understanding about the brain, she actually came to this realization I think is important for all of us just to kind of carry. We wake up in the morning every day, there's some thought in your brain about taking care of your body. It is so ingrained in us now. We know, I need to exercise, I need to move, I need to eat right, I need to do some things to make sure my body is well. We haven't thought that way about the brain, but she wants us to. She wants you to wake up every day and say to yourself, what am I going to do to make sure my brain is well today? We want our bodies to live long, healthy lives so we get to, be around into our old age. If we do the same thing, we can actually have our brain have a long, healthy life where, it's functioning in vital ways into our old age. So I'm going to give you some fundamentals here around the brain. One is, in 1949, they invented neuroscience. And in 1949, when they invented it, it was sort of this realization that there's a lot happening in the brain that we want to study. Now, what they figured out during that time was that we all have this biological thing that's called a stress response in our brain. And that biological stress response comes through the limbic region and it sits in the amygdala. And the amygdala is the part of our brain that when it experiences danger, it will hijack the brain. And it does a few things. It floods our system with adrenaline, which if we're in a scenario where we're literally physically in danger, it utilizes that adrenaline for us to fight or flight, right? There's a couple other now discoveries around what's called freeze or appease, as other states the brain can go into in that moment. But understand that the amygdala takes over. So you're not in charge for about 60 seconds or so. The problem is that the brain actually doesn't know the difference between real danger and imagined danger. So for example, how many of you sat on your couch or been in a movie theater and you had an amygdala hijack? You literally found yourself jumping out of your seat, system was flooded with adrenaline, even though you were sitting in a chair just watching a movie. It's because the brain doesn't know the difference. And so when we imagine danger, it actually starts to create a scenario in our system where we're hijacking our brain often, we're flooding our system with adrenaline, and the hypothalamus is triggered, which then produces cortisol, which is the stress hormone. All of that happens sometimes while we're just sitting in a chair, talking to somebody, looking at something, having a conversation. It gets triggered because our brain, again, can imagine danger when there may not be any. All right. So let's dig in on some of this. The biotypes, the 8 of them, the power of this is that every single one of you has a biotype. And if you understand what that is, it gives you agency over it. But here's the good news, because, unless you actually got a functional MRI, it can be challenging to figure out what your biotype is right away. But if you start to pay attention to how you're responding to stress, you're going to notice over the next few weeks, that's me. That's how I respond to stress. So I'm going to explain it to you. And then I want you just to pay attention. Know that one of these biotypes you're predisposed to, and that's hardwired in your brain. But the others could be triggered just because of environmental issues, environmental challenges, COVID, right? Any of those things can trigger biotypes. Now, one piece I want to just make clear, the goal with this is to do 2 things. Stress just is, right? Stress is an event that occurs, and it's our response to the event, right? So stress isn't good or bad, it's neutral. It's what we do with it that causes it to, become either positive or negative internally. Many of us have had moments where something happened, someone said, "Oh, the sky's falling," and you said, "Okay." You were calm. And other times you had reaction. So what was the difference? If you can imagine stress as a balloon, and you've all had balloons where you had difficulty blowing them up and they were really hard to blow up. Imagine that we can help you make your stress balloon more difficult to blow up, where it's harder. That's one goal. But the second goal is that when stress accumulates such that it becomes stuck, that's when we really have challenges. So our goal is to go upstream. And when you start to accumulate stress, like this balloon, punch little pinpricks in the balloon so that it begins to deflate. So those are our 2 goals from this session. Give you those 2 tips. Here are the biotypes. Rumination, which is the worry biotype. And it's the biotype by which you worry about something ahead of time, you worry about it after the fact. If you make a mistake, you spin. It's hard to let go of it. I can't believe I said that, right? And it will wake us up in the middle of the night, and it'll just, you'll feel it. Some of the behaviors that come along with that, though, is the ones that are most debilitating, which is self-judgment. Ariana talked about the obnoxious roommate in our head. That happens with ruminators. You make a mistake, you start beating yourself up, and you start to feel the stress of what you're doing to yourself. Anxious avoidance, that's the biotype by which you want to get away from the source of your stress. Whatever it is that's causing you stress, you want to go away from it. You'll see procrastination often within this biotype. And part of what happens, just so you know, is, in environments right now where you're more condensed, right? Because you're in spaces where you're not getting out and getting that diversity of connection and interaction that we normally get in our lives. So our world has become very small. And in that smaller world, we will see stressors occur where somebody does something and it has greater impact on us because we don't get that diversity in our brain. We're missing the oxytocin, the serotonin, the dopamine, the endorphins that occur from interaction. Negative bias is a biotype by which when we start to feel stress, we start to see the world through a negative lens. And everything we see, everything we look at, everything we experience it as negative. That's not going to work. I don't like that. It's like hard for us to get out of that real negative state. Threat response is the biotype where when we are experiencing it, it's really triggering that cortisol. We feel danger everywhere. And that stress level is like, I'm not safe. You can look at the news and feel not safe. You can have a conversation with someone and feel not safe. You will often go into the imagination of what could happen, and then you start to produce fear. Emotional numbness is the biotype where the technical term for it is actually anhedonia, which hedonism means pleasure. Hedonia is a subset of that. Anhedonia means no pleasure at all. And so we go into the state of emotional numbness where the things that used to give us pleasure go away. And no matter what it is, there's no pleasure coming to us. It is the biotype where we will see people more often look for things like alcohol or things to sort of stimulate when there's no stimulation. It's one of the reasons why alcohol sales globally have gone up over 400% since the pandemic began. People are stuck, they're in that numbness, and they're looking for some way to feel something. Context and sensitivity, sort of a deeper version of emotional numbness. You get into the place where you don't see any differentiation from work, from home, being with friends, being alone. You lose context and you start to withdraw from life because there's no meaning per se in being in different places for you. Inattention is the biotype by where it becomes very difficult to focus. Your brain, you'll start to try to focus in on something and your brain will just start to lose it. And you'll say, well, I can't seem to stay on track. You'll also notice that short-term memory seems to go. I can't remember what I was going to say. I lose my train of thought. All part of this inattention biotype. And then cognitive fog is when our brain actually moves into a state of malaise. It's a very difficult one and we've all had this experience where you just didn't want to get out of bed in the morning, where nothing seems to want to move and your brain doesn't seem to want to activate. And again, that's one where you do want to pull away from society, pull away from the world, because again, you feel like I just can't operate around people, around things, work, home, doesn't matter what it is. Now, as I describe all those to you, you're probably saying, I've done all of those. And that's true. Because as you look there, see the little dots, colored dots, they represent, if you were getting a functional MRI, where your brain would light up in relationship to your biotype. So they would see that your brain would light up, for example, in rumination. They would know, okay, you're a ruminator. But right now in your life, given your environment, your scenario, and kids and school and COVID and all those things, you might feel more in negative bias and threat response than anything. Even though rumination may be your predisposed version, the world and society and your circumstances are triggering those other two. That's very, very normal. Here's the thing to remember. Every one of us has a predisposition to this. And so whatever biotype that you are, your brain is going to naturally react that way to stress. And so it's important to note that, some days you're going to feel this way. And it's just an awareness. You don't make yourself wrong or bad. You don't judge yourself. You want to normalize this as part of just human behavior. But here's the great news. We now know we can do something about it. Since 1949, I'm 60, so when I grew up, the belief was when you became an adult, your brain was hardwired, and whatever you thought, felt, did was going to stay that way. Well, in the last 20 years, they now realize that's not true. That in fact, the brain is more like plastic, hence the term neuroplasticity. And what that means is if I have a neural pathway that I've been going on, I can actually change behavior. I can change habits by changing my neural pathway. Now, how do you do that? Well, behavioral change scientists will tell you I've seen studies that are as short as 16 days or as long as 254 days. But the microstep idea that Ariana mentioned is critical for the changing of neural pathways. I want you to imagine a neural pathway is simply a road of bricks. Every little brick built that road. We've all been on, brick roads. And if you want to change it, all you need to do is start to take one brick a day, very small actions that over time, you'll notice that you've built this new road. And this road will become thinner and thinner and less impactful. Now, we know this road doesn't go away, but this road becomes your predominant way of thinking, feeling, and doing. That's the goal. And so our work is all based on that. How do you make small steps so you can be as impactful as you can? Sorry, I'm going backwards. So you can be as impactful as you can in changing your neural pathway. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. What do you do about it? And then I'll take some questions. When we looked at all of the things that impacted biotypes, every single biotype, there's a way that you mitigate against it. We've been studying this. How do I interrupt, people who have threat response, or people who are ruminators, or people who have anxious avoidance? What do you do about it? And we studied quite a bit of techniques. We're going to call them microsteps, little things you can do to start to make the brain stronger. So it's harder to blow up the balloon, but interrupt stress when it happens. So you deflate the balloon. This one, the first one I'm going to show you, does both. It deflates stress and it makes your brain stronger and more resilient against stress. It's a simple one, but it's very powerful. And it's called box breathing. Now, it was developed because Navy SEALs, which is a military unit in the US, were going overseas and they were being deployed, and they wanted to figure out how to, come back without being in the same mindset. So they were coming back and they were with their kids and they were going into this amygdala hijack. They were asleep at night and they were waking up in panic. And they were having what's called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And they wanted to understand, how do I stop that from happening in these military people? And they did all kinds of tests. They did drugs. They did all kinds of things. And the thing that worked the best was called box breathing or square breathing. Now, if you're in Asia, you probably have familiarity with the yogic traditions that come out of India that are about breathing and about like centering with breath. And so this isn't necessarily news to you, but I will tell you the science behind this is fascinating, because when you are doing this breathing, your brain, which starts to go into this amygdala hijack, you literally stop it from doing that, because the brain goes, hey, what's going on? And then when you start the breathing technique, you will reset the biochemistry of the brain. And there are two elements to it. The first, you won't see if you look up box breathing online, but it was discovered by Stanford as the key to the whole thing, which is the very first thing you do when you start to go into stress is exhale. You literally blow all the air out of your system, and then you breathe in, counting to 4. You hold for 4, and you exhale for 4. When you do that 3 times, you will have reset the biochemistry of your brain. If you do it 10 times, you literally go into a meditative state. So this is an extremely powerful technique. It doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing, eyes open, you can do box breathing. And nobody even has to know that you're doing it. When you do it, it's like doing a push-up for the brain. So the brain gets stronger. It thickens the prefrontal cortex, which is the smartest part of our brain, the more strategic element of our brain. And it makes us more resilient. So our balloon gets stronger and we deflate the stress in the moment, whatever's happening. So I want to do it with you. Okay. So we're going to practice this together. So the first thing we're going to do is exhale. We're going to blow all the air out of your system, and then I'll count you. We'll breathe in for 4, we'll hold for 4, and we'll exhale for 4, and we'll do that 3 cycles. Okay. So let's begin. Everybody, let's exhale. Blow all the air out. And breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 3, 4, and exhale. 4, breathe in. And hold it. and exhale. And breathe in and hold it and exhale. So you may notice you feel a little different than when you started. If you kept going to 10, you'd probably want to go to sleep. You can use this when you wake up in the middle of the night. It was the best thing for when these military people would wake up and panic in the middle of the night. They would just do this. And I always say, listen, if people like that, it works for, it'll work for us. So try it. I think you'll be shocked at the impact it has on you. Your kids are running, it's crazy, all that's going on. Start that and just let yourself center and relax and come out of the stress cycle, okay? So as much as you want to do it. There's no limit to the amount you can do it. Use it in the moment when you're experiencing it. Use it when you just want to build the practice of it. And you can see it affects every single biotype. Second one on the list, which is also really important, is positive affirmations. I spent a lot of my career working in professional athletics, and I worked with people like Tiger Woods and Kobe Bryant, some of the biggest athletes in the world. And part of what I taught them was how to reframe in the moment when your brain would start to go negative. Because what you would see, and I want all of you to imagine that you are a corporate athlete. You have to perform at your best every day. And that means all day long, but then all night long, because if you have family and others, things like that, then you're still performing. But here's the challenge. When we make mistakes, when we have a moment when we aren't at our best, we often are our own worst judges, juries, and executioners. We beat ourselves up significantly. And I would see in performances with significant athletes where they would make a mistake, and the differentiation between good and great was how you respond to the mistake. If they got on themselves and beat themselves up and got into the narrative, I'm not good enough, I'm stupid, I'm not smart, all the things that we do to ourselves, I would watch their performance dip significantly. But when they could acknowledge, okay, made the mistake, where do I want to go from here? And reframe and go positive, you will now see your brain will improve by 31% when it moves into the positive mindset. Innovation, creativity, problem solving, decision-making, all of it changes by just going, I got it, you're not Pollyannic, you realize something didn't work, but then you move towards, and here's where I want to go. That's what happens with positive affirmations. In the moment, when you make a mistake or when you talk to yourself in a way that doesn't feel good, you start judging yourself, I'm not good enough. You catch it and you tell yourself, you know what? I am capable. I am good. You catch it and flip it. Now, initially, it's going to be hard to actually believe that, because why? You've been saying these words to yourself for years. It's impacted your performance. I've worked with people, the greatest entertainers, business people, athletes, it doesn't matter. They may be great in some areas, but any area that they believe they're not good enough, you will see that manifest in their life. In your brain, there's a part of your brain called the reticular activating system. It sits right at the base of the skull. It filters everything you see, feel, and hear. And it does that based on your beliefs. If you just watch like the elections, if you were observing elections in the US, you probably would sit there and go, how can that person believe that? How can that group believe that? It doesn't even matter if it's true. What matters is what people believe, because once you believe it, now your brain will filter, and it's only going to see, hear, and feel things that map to that belief. So positive affirmations are about focusing yourself in the direction you want to go, because if you believe you're not good enough, you will notice you start to behave that way. This is really powerful. So learn how to change those moments when you start to beat yourself up, and flip the script in your brain. It makes your brain go into growth mindset, 31% more productive, and move out of negative mindset where you lose all of the innovation and creativity. The third thing here is called worry time. Now, this micro step it's very simple, but I tell you, this is one of the ones that people love the most. When you go into the default mode element of the brain, which is the part of our brain that just does reflection, and if you're on a long drive, if you're on a long walk, if you have nothing to do, but you're just kind of sitting and thinking, that's when you'll default into reflection. When you do that, if you naturally are a worrier, a ruminator, negative bias, you're going to go into things that you're worrying about, which causes unconscious stress throughout the day. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to actually schedule every day some time on your calendar to worry. Get a notebook and a pen. And when you get to your worry time, maybe it's 12 to 12:15, just write down, here are the things I'm worried about. There may be a few things that are actionable where you say, oh, I'm worried about my mom. I haven't talked to her in a few days. Okay. Plan to call your mother. I'm worried about this project that I haven't been working on. That's great. Let's schedule time for you to work on that project. But otherwise, I want you to just write down what you're worrying about. At the end of 15 minutes, you set it aside. And then go on with your day. And whenever a worry comes up, you tell yourself, oh, I'll do that tomorrow during worry time. And then tomorrow, you have to have time for worry. Every day you do this, you're going to notice that the stress you have reduces significantly. You're also going to notice that your brain will stop automatically defaulting to worry. You're going to get to the end of your day and you notice, I feel so much better, so much lighter. Now, you can also do this with people on your team. I tell people, like, if you have people in your home that are worriers, okay, gang, we're all going to do a worry time conversation. What's everybody worried about? If you have people on your team, okay, we're going to talk about what we're worried about. The only criteria here is not to do it at night before you go to bed. Every day, in 2 weeks, you're going to see a significant difference in how you feel. Significant. This is an extremely powerful tool. Okay. And then the fourth tool here is around what we call graded exposure. Now, as I said, you're in these tight spaces, right? So again, default mode is the part of you that, reflects and goes into sometimes worry. The central executive network is the part of your brain where that's where the prefrontal cortex lives. It's the more strategic part of your brain. The salience network is the part of our brain that pays attention to what we need to pay attention to. And again, it does that based on what we say is important. So how many of you have ever been driving a car and you went into default mode and you just started reflecting, and then you look up and you are 5 miles down the road and you ask yourself, how did I do that? The salience network knows how to drive. It will drive even if you're not in that part of the brain. So you won't notice that you're doing it, but you're doing it. So that's an important element of the brain, because that's the part of your brain when you say, I love, red Teslas. You're going to start to notice red Teslas everywhere because you tell that part of your brain, that's important to me. That part of your brain can become overwhelmed. If you are worrying about COVID, for example, you're going to see everything out there related to that, and you'll get triggered all day long. So what can happen is you can get to a state where you feel overwhelmed and you're like, why am I so irritated by this scenario? Why is this bothering me so much? It's because your brain is being overwhelmed by all of the things it's paying attention to that are causing it stress. You're worried about something, it adds up. So here's a tool, because you can have a moment when this it overflows. And maybe it's when somebody says something to you in your house. Maybe it's when you get an email. So let's say you got an email and you were you're at that edge and you spill over. You're upset by the email. It takes you out of your game, right? You start to notice that you're really stressed out about this thing. Here's the thing. I want you to interrupt stress every time it happens. So the goal here would be to say, hey, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to get up and go outside and walk. I'm going to breathe some fresh air. I'm going to do something to interrupt the stress of the moment. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do a very small thing. So you say, hey, Joey, I got your email. I'll respond to you later on today. And you let it go. And then you de-stress, you like deflate that balloon. And then later when you do it, your balloon is not stressed out. This is a really important tool to take these small actions, because I'll have people say to me, I had a horrible day. And I'll say, why? Because of this email I got this morning. It's like, I want you to start managing your brain. Don't let your brain manage you. Don't let one email take you out of the whole day. Don't let anything steal your joy, right? Move into a state where every time you experience the stress, you go, okay, I'm going to box breathe. I'm going to stretch. I'm going to move. I'm going to do something. And then I'll come back to the moment. I won't go from one stressful call to the next. I'll break up the moments in between so that I don't allow this stress to accumulate. Find a go-to recharge. You decide what it is. I will tell you one last thing here, and that is there are 4 very specific things, no matter who you are, you can do. And these 4 things will build the resilience in your brain. One is make sure you're moving 3 times a week. 3 times a week of 20 minutes or more recharges the brain. 2, make sure you're getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. It's a huge one. It's not easy, but you got to start to get there. Right now, during this time, that your brain needs that recharge that 7 to 9 hours gives you. 3, try to eat as healthy as you can. Try to cut back on processed sugar and processed foods, and drink more water. Your brain's 14% more productive when it's hydrated. So do your best to drink more water. Start your morning with water, slice of lemon, kind of gives the alkaline, kind of gives your body a little more flu resistance. And also it will begin to hydrate your system. And the last thing is keep connecting with people as much as you can. Don't let yourself, not have connection for periods of time. Reach out to someone and make sure the people around you also are not alone. Connection feeds the part of the brain that stimulates it, and make sure it's well during this time. So let me pause, Haslinda, and make sure I can take some questions for people, regardless of what you have. I'm happy to support. Or Georgette, you're going to do it?
Yes, I'm going to take those questions for you. Wow, what an amazing session, Joey. And some really somewhat almost simple tips that perhaps we haven't thought of. And I'm seeing some chatter here on the Q&A about how, yes, we've never thought of these things in this particular way. So thank you so much for sharing. It was amazing. And let's take a few questions, shall we?
Sure.
We've got one here from Mel Namarla, who's saying, I'm usually a positive person, but lately it's been hard. I've been working at it. She's been working out, eating well, reading lots to keep my spirits up, but it's getting tougher each day. Am I perhaps ignoring something more important that I can't recognize? What's your advice to Mel?
So she talked about movement, which is great. She talked about she's doing some, reading is a great stimulation for the soul. Is she sleeping, right? 7 to 9 hours. That could be the missing component. And how is she eating? Diet's really important. Make sure she doesn't have too much sugar, processed foods, and that hydration. Those are the 4 big ones. If you're doing that, your brain is going to be really well. Now, there's one other element. How is she connecting with others, right? Because if you're missing the endorphins, the serotonins, the oxytocin, the dopamine from connection, which could be important to you, you might be an extrovert that needs more of that than others, then how are you getting that? I want you to be thinking about small connection points where I'm just going to put down all devices and have a good conversation with someone. I'm going to have a buddy that I reach out to and we just check in once a day. Hey, how are you? Whatever that might be, connection could be also the missing component. If you get all that going, I think you'll be fine. So you may just be missing that or your sleep.
Another couple of great questions here. Annie Joseph is asking, why are there no positive biotypes? They all seem to be negatively skewed. And subsequently, how do you deal with a situation when somebody is constantly either criticizing you, emailing you, saying you're a disappointment? How do you avoid this from affecting your positive affirmation?
So 2 things. One is biotypes are specifically looking at how people respond to stress. So it's not like they're positive or negative. They just are, right? This is how I respond to stress. And so that's the awareness to just have there. Don't judge them as that they're negative. Just judge them that that's what I do. Now I want to make sure I mitigate against that. That's really important. You have to be careful right now about what you let in, because, as I said, the diversity of connection, we're not out, we're not getting as much air and all that. You have to be watchful of what you're looking at every day. And so negative impact is, or negative even comments and negative thoughts and all that has greater impact on you than it might normally. And so be careful. How much news are you watching? You might need to cut the news out because you look at the news and then feel horrible. You might be watching a series that you're fascinated by. When you finish, you're stressed out and you're in a negative mindset because of it. So you've got to be really disciplined about what you allow in. And that includes people that are constantly sending you negative things. It's like some of that maybe I can't completely cut it out, but you might want to watch it. I haven't been on social media in 8 months. I'm doing 80 webinars, a month. I can't afford to spend my time that's away from that on things that are just going to be more time at screens. There's a great Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma by a guy that Ariana supported named Tristan Harris in making. It's worth looking at because you might also be having some social media habits or technology habits that could also be impacting that. So just pay attention. Don't let all that in, but you also have to make sure you build up that positive affirmation, because sometimes we see those things and they reinforce the negative affirmation that we have about ourselves. We haven't spent enough time building the positive one up. So make sure you do that as well.
I have a couple of related questions, really good ones. And this concerns whether or not the application of these tips can be used for kids or younger people. And is there a difference, is age a factor basically in
No,
the use of these tips?
I am 100% behind. The earlier you get kids on this, the stronger you help their brains become. You don't know me, but that's one of my passions. I do this. I have a class at USC. I have a class at Harvard Business School. We do programs for organizations who have parents who have kids. We did a whole program just for Procter and Gamble's kids. I am passionate about helping young people learn this now because they're more impacted by social media than we are. They look at social media and they say, hey, I'm not good enough. I don't have that. I don't look like that. And it impacts their self-esteem and overall well-being. We have to get them out of that mindset. They have to recognize they're valuable just because of who they are. And then that helps them go do and have the things in the world that mean something to them, not trying to match up to this artificial means of measurement. So passionate about that, please share it with your kids as soon as possible.
An interesting one here. What effect do coffee and alcohol, like a glass of wine, have in stress response?
Well, they don't help at all, unfortunately. Alcohol impairs sleep, right? So if you drink alcohol at the end of the night, it's going to hinder your ability to get the deep sleep you need. And so 1 glass for women, 2 glass for men have a significant impact, about 77% on your faculties the next day. So that's a challenge. Caffeine, I say cut off around 2, because you may or may not be affected by it at night. Some people are, some people aren't. If you cut off at 2, the half-life on it won't impact your sleep. So have as much as you want prior to 2, but then at 2, shut it down. And then after 3 weeks, if you don't notice a difference at all, then fine. Some people can drink caffeine and go to sleep right away. So you have to decide what works for you, but test it, because it could be impairing. Both of those could be impairing your ability to sleep, which then impacts your stress levels, because it elevates the parts of our body that are more sensitive to stress.
Joey, I have somebody here Adrienne, who says she's struggling with pain. And this interferes with her sleep, and she's getting half of what you're recommending. She's only getting 3.5 hours a night. Is there a medicinal way to manage the pain that you could recommend?
Yeah, meditation. You should look up the science of meditation and pain. They've seen some forms of meditation can reduce pain response by 40%. So I want you to, because pain obviously is activated in the brain. So again, the more you're meditating, the more you're thickening the prefrontal cortex and causing your brain to have a distance between stimulus and response, which means there's distance between the source of pain and the pain, which means the pain's reduced. So I'd encourage you to do that. And I encourage you to do that box breathing technique often throughout the day, because that also thickens the prefrontal cortex. Those two things can be very helpful for reducing pain in the system. And it's a tough one, and I want you to do your best to try and, get your way up to more sleep, because that will also help. The lack of sleep, unfortunately, is impacting your experience of pain, but the experience of pain is impacting your ability to get more sleep. So work your way up as best you can.
We are running out of time, but we still got a few more questions. Here's a really good one, which I think we are all facing because of the pandemic and the lockdowns, and it's coming from Hamin Kaur, who's actually one of our board directors here at UWS. Should working from home extensively be encouraged? Seeing the need to make the connections with people. So how do you manage this with working from home and not having this extensive connections, to your point, being such an important factor?
Yeah, I was just talking to a Stanford economist that was saying that they're predicting a 5 to 10% drop in productivity over the next several months because of this lack of connection and the more time we're just looking at screens. Think about it this way. When you're with people in a room, you don't have to focus in the same way. You pick up cues in a different way. You cannot be looking at them and still have an experience of being with them. That doesn't happen on screens. And so it's taxing our brain in ways that our brains have never had to deal with before in modern history. And so, yes, there will be a dip in productivity the more we do this. Now, I will say this. We saw a spike in productivity when we went into this because people didn't have to travel. They liked being around their kids. They loved all that. Now we're starting to get to the other side of that, right? There's probably an in-between that's going to be the final solution. There are those that really want to be out and connecting and need to do that. And there are those who have enough stimulus at home between kids and partner and all of that, where they feel enough connection in their day that the lack of connection at work doesn't affect them. So you might have to provide an environment where people get to decide based on what's important for them. Young people, a lot of young people are struggling right now because they're at that part in their life where they want out there, they want connection, they want to meet a potential partner, spouse, etc. And so that's missing. So I won't say it's going to go one way or another, but we will start to see the impact of it. And that one day, most companies are going to probably find they'll do both.
Joey, thank you so much for your time sharing. What great advice! It's simple yet very doable, and we all need to be starting to do this. I think we're all going to be box breathing for the next few minutes. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, and on behalf of United Women Singapore, I'd like to thank Arianna Huffington and Joey Hubbard for joining us today, for sharing in an amazing and engaging session, sharing their amazing insights, experiences, and fantastic doable advice. And a special thanks goes out to Haslinda for moderating the session. Thank you again. And at this point, let me also acknowledge and thank our partners, Goldman Sachs, MasterCard, and Bloomberg, for their support and their continued support, actually, in making not just today's event happen, but for their continued support in enabling UWS to be doing the work that we do in Singapore to enable the empowerment of women and girls. A special thanks goes out to all of you who have been dialing in, watching this webinar from around the region, in fact, around the world, and have spent the last 90 minutes with us. I think you'll all agree that this has been a super interaction, and I think this has really kicked off our Distinguished Speakers series moving forward. So thank you for attending the webinar. We hope that you will actually continue to support our events and support us. And as a very, very special treat to all of you who made time to join us for this webinar today, Arianna has very kindly made a PDF copy of her book, Thrive, the third metric to redefining success and creating a happier life, available to all of you. So you'll be hearing from us in the next coming couple of days, and we'll be emailing it to all of you. You see on your screen a QR code. Please, please spend a minute to give us your feedback. It is super valuable in helping us work our way through and better how we deliver this series to you. And also you see on the screen our social media channels. So please stay tuned, connect with us. Joey recommends connection, so stay connected with us. And keep an eye out for more of the very exciting events and initiatives that we'll be rolling out in the coming months. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, once again for your participation. We look forward to seeing more of you and engaging with you and connecting with you as we continue to advance women's empowerment and gender equality here in Singapore. Thank you very much. Take care now.